Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the case of Abraham Shakespeare. But before I do, I just want to give a little disclaimer. I actually found this case quite difficult to research. There isn't too much information online about this case, and I struggled to put the information into a timeline. So I've tried to structure this case in a way that hopefully makes the most sense. But if I've got something wrong or if I've missed something out, as usual, please do feel free to let me know in the comments. But I just wanted to say that at the start of this video because this case confused me a little bit when I was researching it, but hopefully I've structured it in a way that makes sense to you guys. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now and we shall just get into today's case. So this case took place in 2009 in Florida in the US. And this is Abraham Shakespeare. He was a 42-year-old man and he was born on April the 24th, 1966 in Lakeland in Florida. I couldn't find much information online about Abraham's upbringing and childhood, but I believe he was close to his family, in particular his mother, and he also had two sons, both of which had different mothers, and he wasn't with either mother. He was single at the time of this case taking place. Abraham was illiterate, so he couldn't read or write very well. He really struggled with that, and he worked as a casual labourer and a truck driver, so he didn't really have a steady income. He kind of just did odd jobs here and there for various different people, including a man named Greg Smith. Greg Smith owned a barbershop in Lakeland in Florida, and he would often pay Abraham to come into his shop and just do little odd jobs here and there, like sweeping the floor, cleaning. And Abraham and Greg were really good friends. They became really good friends. They had jokes together. They really enjoyed each other's company until one day Greg noticed that Abraham just stopped coming into the shop. Which was odd because Abraham was in quite a lot. He didn't have a lot of money. Like I said, he didn't really have a steady income, and so he needed the money that Greg would pay him for these odd jobs, but he just stopped coming in. Eventually, it had been a few weeks since Greg had last seen Abraham, and so he decided just to ring him and check if he was okay. And when Abraham answered the phone, he said that the reason he hadn't been into work was because he actually purchased a lottery ticket and won. But Greg didn't believe him. He was just like, no, you're joking. You have not won the lottery. But then later, Greg was standing in his barbershop. He was cutting someone's hair when all of a sudden he looked up and he saw out of his window a black BMW car pull up, a very expensive car. And inside of it was his friend, Abraham Shakespeare, who had in fact won the lottery. It was November the 15th, 2006, when Abraham and his co-worker named Michael headed to a convenience store in Frostproof in Florida. Abraham didn't actually go into the store. He stayed inside the truck whilst Michael, his co-worker, went into the convenience store. But before he did, he asked Abraham if he wanted anything from the store, and Abraham said yes. He gave Michael $2 and he said, "Please, can you pick me up a lottery ticket?" And this lottery ticket was the winning one. Abraham Shakespeare had won $30 million. He decided to take one lump sum of $17 million instead of getting it paid to him yearly, and he pretty much straight away bought a new house in Lakeland in Florida worth $1.1 million, and he also purchased a few new cars. He was absolutely loving it, like most people would. It is most people's dream to win the lottery. However, it wasn't long until Abraham started to get unwanted attention because of his lottery win. As you can imagine, Abraham suddenly gained a lot of friends. And I say friends because it's believed that most of these people were just interested in Abraham because of his money and not actually being friends with him. A lot of these new friends were coming to Abraham after his lottery win and asking for money, and Abraham was a very generous person. If someone was asking for money, he would not hesitate in giving it to them, and he was probably fully aware that people were taking advantage of him, but he was such a kind-hearted person that he would just give it to them anyway. And his friend and former boss Greg Smith even said that one day Abraham came into the barbershop and he said that he just wished he had his old life back before winning the lottery, because he was sick of being used by people and of the constant attention he was getting for being a lottery winner.
Every day he come to the barbershop and he was like, I wish I could go back to my old self. I wish I didn't even have no money.
He was serious when he said that.
He was dead serious.
But despite this, Abraham also ended up lending some money to his friend Greg. You see, Greg's mother's house had gone into default and she had fallen behind on her mortgage payments, and Greg was intending on just going to the bank and asking for a loan from them, but he said that Abraham was insistent on giving him the money. And so Greg kindly accepted and Abraham gave him $63,000. However, Abraham was adamant that he was going to pay his friend back, and he gave Abraham his accountant so that it was all like official. But Abraham found it increasingly difficult to handle his finances. Like I mentioned earlier, he was illiterate and he didn't really know anything about how to invest his money. He was just kind of stuck because he had all of this money and he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know how to manage it and he felt as though it was just being wasted. But then 11 months after his lottery win, Abraham met a woman named Doris Donegan Moore, although most people called her Dee Dee Moore, so that's what I'm going to be calling her throughout this video, Dee Dee Moore. Now, Dee Dee was around 40 years old, I believe, at the time of this case taking place, and she herself had a son who was born in 1995. And she didn't know Abraham prior to him winning the lottery. It's believed that she saw his face on the news because obviously his lottery win gained a lot of media attention. And she approached Abraham and she asked him if she could write a book about his life and his life as a millionaire. And Dee Dee told Abraham that if he wanted, she could help him manage his money better. She said that she had a lot of knowledge about how to organize your finances, and I think she told Abraham that money managing was her actual job alongside running a nursing staff agency. However, something that Dee Dee didn't tell Abraham was that she actually had a criminal record. She had been convicted before for insurance fraud and for falsely reporting a crime, and she was ordered to serve a year of probation for this in 2001. But Abraham became good friends with Dee Dee and he really trusted her, and he agreed to let her write a book about him and also manage his finances. He even brought a whole house for her as her like office space for while she was managing his finances and writing this book. However, no book was ever written. The two of them, Dee Dee and Abraham, eventually went on to set up a company and business together, although I'm not sure what this company was. And Dee Dee would write checks in Abraham's name and she would cash in these checks. She would withdraw the money from this company's funds and use it for herself. It was clear that she had an ulterior motive for becoming friends with Abraham, but he had absolutely no idea. He genuinely thought that they were friends and now business partners, and he thought that she was just trying to help him when in reality she was trying to take his money. Which is ironic considering that Dee Dee would film Abraham. She would make like little home videos of him and she would ask him in these videos how he felt about the fact that people always came to him for money and how people always wanted to borrow money from him all the time.
Do you get tired of people asking you for money all the time, Abe?
They don't take no for an answer.
I'll try and insert some of the footage now, but she would also ask him questions about how he felt about moving away and where he was going to move to, which you'll come to see is quite significant as we go through this case.
But pay close attention to this, the only video of Dee Dee and Shakespeare together. You'll notice, instead of talking about the past, Dee Dee asks Shakespeare about his future.
So where do you want to go to?
It don't matter to me. I'm not a picky person.
California. You want a foreign country?
You ready?
Cozumel. Are you going to miss your home?
Yeah, but I miss it, but life goes on.
Within 6 months of Abraham meeting Dee Dee, she had taken over his bank account. She had taken control of his bank accounts. She had transferred ownership of his home to her company, and she also began going after the people who owed Abraham money. If you remember from earlier on in the video, when Abraham won the lottery, a lot of people came to him and asked to borrow some money, and Dee Dee began going after those people. She would go to them and say that this money needed repaying, even though it wasn't her money in the first place. She just completely took over, and it seemed as though a lot of this money, a lot of Abraham's money, was going in her pocket. She would buy herself expensive cars, and she would go on holidays with Abraham's money, and she withdrew $1 million from their company's funds. So the money that should have been going into the company, going into the business, she was taking that out and putting it in her own account for herself. And then in April of 2009, it seemed as though 42-year-old Abraham Shakespeare just completely vanished. He wasn't contacting his friends and family, and so naturally they became concerned, and they asked his friend and business partner Dee Dee Moore where he was. And Dee Dee said that Abraham just decided to lay low for a while. She said that he was sick and tired of people constantly coming to him for money and of the attention that he was getting for being a millionaire, and so he just decided to get away from it all for a while. She told people that he was on vacation and that he had decided to move. However, she would change the story every single time. One minute she would say that he was in Miami, the next she would say he was in Texas, then it was Jamaica. On one occasion she said that he was on a cruise. Another time she said that he was in Haiti, but he was stuck there because there was an earthquake. She just changed the story a lot, and it meant that no one really knew where Abraham was, because she would constantly say that he was in different places. It was really strange. Although if you remember from the video that Dee Dee recorded of Abraham shortly before he vanished, that does indicate that he had moved away, because he's talking about missing his home and where he's going to go. So it seems like from that the story could be true, although some of Abraham's family members were not convinced and they decided to file a missing persons report. They were concerned that something more sinister had happened to Abraham. So the police began their investigation into Abraham Shakespeare's disappearance, and they were immediately suspicious of Dee Dee Moore. They just felt as though she knew more than she was letting on. But Dee Dee was just sticking to her story that Abraham left on his own and he just wanted to get away for a while.
I don't want nobody to be able to talk to me. I don't want nobody to be able to track me. And I'll come back every so often.
She explained to the detectives and anyone else who asked that Shakespeare had skipped town, tired of people hounding him for cash, just as that videotape she created seemed to suggest.
So at this point, Dee Dee starts panicking, and she is worried that the police think that she is guilty of something, and so she turns to a man named Greg Smith to help her. Now, if you remember from earlier on in the video, Greg Smith was good friends with Abraham, and Abraham actually lent him $63,000. So Dee Dee goes to Greg and she tells him about the whole situation with the police and Abraham. She says that Abraham is on vacation. He's decided to go away for a while, and she is worried because the police seem to think that she has done something to Abraham. And at the time, Greg was in some debt. He was really struggling for money. And so Dee Dee saw an opportunity here because she was looking for a way to get the police off her back about Abraham. And she decides to make Greg an offer. She tells Greg that she will give him $300 if he rings Abraham's mother, Elizabeth, pretending to be Abraham, because obviously Abraham's mother was really concerned about her son. She hadn't heard from him, and so Dee Dee said to Greg, you ring her pretending to be Abraham just to put her mind at rest a bit, and then that would get the police off my back. Does that make sense? And Greg agreed to do it because he really needed the money, and he thought that his friend was fine. He thought that he was just off somewhere on vacation. He wanted some space, and he did think that this would put his mother's mind at rest. So one evening, Dee Dee took Abraham's mother, Elizabeth, out for dinner in a busy, loud restaurant. And whilst they were eating, Elizabeth received a call from her son, Abraham. Or at least she thought it was from her son Abraham. In reality, we know that it was actually her son's friend, Greg Smith.
I was like, Mom, how you doing? This Abraham. I'm okay. I just want to let you know I'm okay. And hung up.
Now, obviously, this does seem like quite a cruel thing for Greg to do, but like I said, he says that he did it because he genuinely thought that Dee Dee was telling the truth about Abraham being on vacation, and he thought by ringing Abraham's mother, he would be able to put her mind at ease a bit, and she would stop worrying about her son. However, as time went on, Greg began getting more and more suspicious about Dee Dee's story, and so he decided to try and contact his friend Abraham himself. He rang Abraham's mobile phone, but there was no answer, and so he left a voicemail for him asking him to call him back. But Abraham never did. Instead, Greg actually received a text from Abraham's number which said, quote, "I'll call you in a little while." And as soon as Greg received this text, he knew that something wasn't right because, like I've said throughout this video, Abraham Shakespeare was illiterate. He couldn't read or write, and so he never texted anyone. So who actually wrote this text and sent it from Abraham's phone? Now, somehow the police found out about Dee Dee giving Greg Smith $300 to pretend to be Abraham. I'm not entirely sure how they found that out, maybe through phone records, but they found out, and of course they were immediately suspicious because Dee Dee was paying Greg Smith to pretend to be a missing man. And so they brought Greg in for questioning, and he told them the truth about what was going on, that Dee Dee had paid him to pretend to be Abraham. And it was at this point that the police told Greg that they were suspicious that something more sinister had happened to Abraham Shakespeare. They felt as though Dee Dee Moore had done something to Abraham, and Greg was shocked. This whole time he genuinely believed Dee Dee. He believed that his friend Abraham had just gone on vacation and wanted to get away for a while. And the police saw an opportunity here with Greg because obviously Dee Dee trusted Greg. She trusted him to make that phone call pretending to be Abraham, and so the police thought that they could use Greg to get more information out of Dee Dee about Abraham's disappearance. Because at this point, even though police were very suspicious of Dee Dee and they thought that she had something to do with Abraham's disappearance, they couldn't really arrest and charge her with anything without any proper evidence. It was literally just suspicion at this point. They wouldn't even know what to charge her with because they didn't know if Abraham was dead or alive. The police needed to catch Dee Dee out somehow, and they wanted to use Greg Smith to do this. The police told Greg that they were worried that Dee Dee had done something to Abraham, possibly murdered him for his money, and so Greg was all up for helping them as much as he could. He wanted to find answers about what actually happened to his friend. So the police gave Greg a wire, which is like a recording device which he could wear under his clothes, and he was to try and speak to Dee Dee to see if he could get any information out of her about the whereabouts of Abraham Shakespeare. However, Greg decided that he wanted to do it another way, and instead of putting the recording device under his clothes, he decided to put it inside an empty Red Bull drinks can because he thought that it was less obvious that way. With a wire under his clothes, it's possible that he could like move and Dee Dee would see it on him and she would know that he was working with the police, but no one would suspect that there was a recording device inside a drinks can. So he put the recording device in his empty Red Bull can, and he put the can in a cup holder in his car, and he asked Dee Dee Moore to come and sit with him in his car so they could talk about about this whole situation in private. They met up quite a few times and all of these conversations were obviously recorded, and Dee Dee had no idea that the police were listening in on what she was saying. Now, at first, Dee Dee still maintains that Abraham is alive in her conversations with Greg, but as they continue speaking, she slowly starts to hint at the fact that he isn't. She starts talking to Greg about a man named Ronald, and she says that Ronald is a drug dealer who threatened Dee Dee, and was the one that murdered Abraham Shakespeare. So essentially, she admitted that Abraham was dead. However, it's believed that this Ronald never actually existed. The police think that he was just an imaginary person that Dee Dee came up with to take the blame for Abraham's death. But we'll talk a bit more about Ronald the drug dealer a little bit later on. So like I said, Greg and Dee Dee had multiple conversations that were recorded, and these conversations happened over a span of a few months, I believe. Greg was trying to get Dee Dee to trust him so that hopefully she would piece by piece feed him more and more information about where Abraham was, and if he was dead and he was murdered, where his body was. And this is exactly what she did. She never actually admitted to killing Abraham herself. She always blamed this Ronald guy, and like I said, we'll talk a bit more about that later. But she did admit to knowing where his body was. But before she told Greg where the body was, she said that she needed someone to take the fall for Abraham's murder. She knew that someone needed to go down for this crime, was going to go to prison for this crime, and she was not going to let it be her. Dee Dee Moore told Greg that she needed to find someone that she could pay to take the blame for Abraham's murder, which, I mean, if she didn't commit the murder, why would she feel the need to pay someone else to pretend that they were the ones who committed the murder? Does that make sense? She was literally willing to pay someone thousands of dollars to take the blame for this crime. Why would she do that if she wasn't the one who committed the crime? And so Greg goes back to the detectives and he tells them that Dee Dee has said that she is willing to pay someone to take the blame for Abraham's murder, and so they arrange for a policeman to go undercover and act as though he is willing to take the fall for this murder. Does this make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. So Greg and this undercover policeman go to Dee Dee, and this undercover policeman, who Dee Dee doesn't know is an undercover policeman, says that he is willing to go to prison for the murder of Abraham Shakespeare if Dee Dee pays his family $50,000. And Dee Dee agreed. She says, yes, okay, I'll pay you $50,000 if you go to prison for this crime. At this point, Greg asks Dee Dee where the body is, because if this guy is going to confess to Abraham's murder, he obviously needs to know where he supposedly disposed of this body. And Dee Dee says that Abraham's body is buried on her property in her back garden under a concrete slab, which, I mean, pretty much confirms that she's Abraham's killer, because if someone else killed Abraham, why would they bury him on her property? Once Dee Dee tells Greg this, he says that she needs to move the body, because if this guy's going to confess to Abraham's murder and Abraham's body is on Dee Dee's property, it definitely looks like she had something to do with it.
Then she goes on to say, I can show you where the body's at, but the problem is the body's on my property.
Just like I said, the goddamn body's still on that property. We're moving the body tonight.
Greg tells Dee Dee that he will help her move this body, and he gives her a list of items to go and buy from like a DIY store, I think, to help them move the body. And she is caught on CCTV in a store doing just this, buying the items that Greg told her to buy. So the plan is working well. Dee Dee is essentially confessing to Greg because she thinks that she can trust him, but this whole time Greg is actually working with detectives to catch her out. The next thing that Greg starts to ask Dee Dee about is the murder weapon. He says that if this guy is going to take the fall for Abraham's murder, she needs to hand over the murder weapon so that they can somehow pin it on this guy, the undercover policeman. And so she does just this. She gives Greg the pistol that was used to shoot and kill Abraham Shakespeare.
She trusted you that much that she handed you the murder weapon.
Exactly.
Which again, why would this woman have the murder weapon if she wasn't the one who committed the murder? There's just so much evidence against Dee Dee Moore at this point. So now the detectives have almost all of the evidence they need to arrest and charge Dee Dee Moore, but first they need to recover Abraham's body. And soon they do. Abraham Shakespeare's body was recovered on the 26th of January 2010, almost 10 months after he was last seen alive, and it was right where Dee Dee told Greg it was. His body was buried in the back garden of her property under 9 feet of dirt under a concrete slab. Abraham had been shot twice in the chest area, I believe, with the exact gun that Dee Dee handed over to Greg Smith, and this was Dee Dee's gun. The police later found receipts which proved that Dee Dee purchased this exact gun that was used to kill Abraham Shakespeare. So Dee Dee Moore was arrested on suspicion of murder, and the detectives believed that the motive for the murder was clearly money. They believe that in April of 2009, Dee Dee and Abraham got into an argument about his money and how she had access to his finance accounts. He probably realized that she was taking and using a lot of his money, and so she decided to shoot and kill him. The police believe that Abraham was killed on either the 6th or 7th of April, and that Dee Dee's ex-husband actually helped her dig his grave. Although he didn't know that he was digging Abraham's burial site, Dee Dee actually told him that she needed a big pit in her backyard for burning trash, and so he did this. He dug this pit, and he was completely unaware of what she actually planned to use it for. It's believed that she then buried Abraham's body on her own, and then she hired a contractor to cover the soil with concrete. Again, this contractor had no idea what was underneath. He had no idea what he was covering. And then, as we know, she came up with the story that Abraham had just moved away. He was on vacation. She would text his friends and family from his phone pretending to be him, which was an immediate red flag for them because obviously he was illiterate. He couldn't text. And then eventually she starts talking to Greg Smith, who, unbeknown to her, is actually working with the detectives, and she tells him where the body is. Now, once Dee Dee was arrested and taken in for questioning, no surprise, she does not admit to killing Abraham. At first, she sticks to the story that this mysterious drug dealer named Ronald was the killer, but she said that she didn't know Ronald's last name and she didn't know how to contact him or where to find him. She tried to claim that this Ronald was Abraham's killer and that he was trying to frame her for the murder, but the problem was she kept changing what Ronald looked like. One minute she would say that Ronald was a black drug dealer, the next minute she would say he was a white drug dealer. Her story would just constantly change.
Honestly, what he calls himself is Ronald.
Your mind's moving 100 miles an hour. Dee Dee, it's not feasible what you're telling me. What you're saying is impossible.
The police just knew that Dee Dee was lying about this Ronald person. It was just someone that she had made up because she needed someone to pin this murder on. If you remember from earlier on in the video, she even asked Greg Smith to pretend to be Ronald at one point, which just proves that she's lying.
She forgets that she had put you up to be Ronald.
Exactly.
And that you know that he's imaginary.
Exactly. She forgot I was
Not that
wrong.
smart after all.
But I believe that the police did look into this Ronald person anyway, just in case there was some truth in what Dee Dee was saying, but they couldn't find any evidence to indicate that this Ronald person even existed, let alone was responsible for Abraham Shakespeare's murder. Dee Dee Moore just never wanted to admit that she was the one who killed Abraham, and unbelievably, at one point she even blamed her 14-year-old son. She said that her 14-year-old son was the killer. But again, there was absolutely no evidence that this was true. This was just something that Dee Dee had made up. All of the evidence that the police had pointed to one person, and that was Dee Dee Moore. But Dee Dee was still maintaining her innocence, and so the case actually went to trial because she pled not guilty. Now, Dee Dee never took to the stand in court. However, they still heard from her, the jury and the whole court still heard from her throughout the entire trial because she was very emotional. She would cry and sob and literally break down during the trial to the point where the judge actually had to tell her to calm down and compose herself.
Just a moment, ma'am. Just a moment. I'm going to tell you once again. You need to compose yourself. You understand that?
Dee Dee's defense team tried to claim that although there was a lot of circumstantial evidence implicating Dee Dee, there was nothing concrete to say that she was the one to actually physically murder Abraham Shakespeare. And so because of that, they said that she shouldn't be found guilty for it. I don't believe there was any forensic or DNA evidence linking Dee Dee to the murder or to Abraham's body, because when his body was recovered, it was obviously 10 months after he had been killed, and so because of how decomposed his body was, they couldn't retrieve any forensic evidence. That's what I could gather anyway. There wasn't too much information online about DNA and forensic evidence in this case, so I'm guessing that there wasn't any. But the prosecution presented the jury with all of the evidence against Dee Dee, including the recorded conversations between her and Greg, and also a letter that Dee Dee had written. Basically, when Abraham was just missing, Dee Dee wrote a letter pretending to be Abraham, and this letter was addressed to his mother. But this letter that Dee Dee had written, where she was pretending to be Abraham, was about 2 pages long, and it basically said that he didn't want to be found, he had moved away, and he just wanted to be alone. However, like I've said countless times throughout this video, Abraham Shakespeare was illiterate. He couldn't have written this letter. We know that Dee Dee wrote it, but why would she need to write it unless she was trying to cover up his murder? And why would she try and cover up a murder if she wasn't the one who committed it in the first place? This whole time she was protesting her innocence, but why would she go to the lengths of literally offering someone thousands and thousands of dollars to take the blame for this crime if she wasn't the one who committed the crime? I hope that will make sense what I've just said. I just find it so baffling that she was protesting her innocence this whole time, but there's so much evidence to say that she was lying and that she killed Abraham. And this is exactly what the jury thought as well. It took them just 3 hours to deliberate before returning with a guilty verdict on December the 10th, 2010. Dee Dee Moore was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Abraham Shakespeare.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. The defendant did actually possess and discharge a firearm causing death.
She was also given an additional 25-year sentence for possessing a gun in the course of a violent felony. Despite being found guilty, Dee Dee has always maintained that she is innocent. She has never admitted to being the one who killed Abraham. She has done a few interviews during her time in prison, so if I can, I'll play a few clips of those now.
I'm not nervous. I don't get nervous.
I think people are complete idiots that think I had anything to do with it. I really do. I think they have no brain cells. That's just my opinion.
Did you murder Abraham Shakespeare?
Absolutely not.
Did you bury him in your backyard?
Absolutely not.
Why are you laughing?
Because
a man is dead. He's been murdered,
yes,
clearly.
Yes.
And you're laughing.
Yeah. Because I find it entertaining that people are that ignorant. Because there are so many things that proves my innocence.
You ended up in his house with all the rest of his money. Then he ended up dead in your property.
Okay. But
shot by your gun. You don't find any of that unusual or odd?
Absolutely not.
She also pretty much blames her lawyer for the guilty verdict because she says that she wanted to take to the stand in court, but her lawyer said no. Whereas her lawyer says that that decision was made by Dee Dee. She chose not to take the stand.
We discussed with Ms. Moore whether she wished to testify. That discussion had gone on for quite some time. and she made the decision not to do that.
She still claims that a drug dealer named Ronald was Abraham's killer and that he framed her for the murder. And she also says that she actually has witnesses that can back up her story, but she's never given the names of these witnesses, so whether they actually exist or not, I don't know. But yeah, that is the end of this case. I feel like this video was a little bit all over the place, but like I said at the start of the video, I found it really hard to piece this case together. But I hope you guys were able to make sense of this case and I did the case justice. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on it in the comments. Also, just want to give a special shout out to the members of my Patreon page. Thank you so much for your support, guys. If anyone else wants to become a member of our little Patreon family, the link is always in the description of my videos. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again very soon for another mystery with Mollie. Bye guys.